Hello everyone, and welcome back to Timothy Long Blacksmithing. So, today's episode is pretty much just going to be from here, but it's going to be some pretty cool stuff. So, today I'm going to be talking about early weapons, and I'm going to be going back to the Bronze Age. The earliest stuff that we can see being made out of bronze, for the sake of weaponry, is the Epsilon axe. Now, I'm sure there are probably older examples of weaponry out there, but this is the first one that I really ran across, other than the next thing, which is what it evolved into, which is the Khopesh. Now we see examples of the Khopesh dating all the way back to 2500 BC, back to some depiction of a guy named King Anatum of Lagash, which is all the way in Mesopotamia, which is interesting because the Khopesh is an Egyptian weapon. So for it to have been made in Egypt, or at least for the design to have originated in Egypt and ended up all the way in Mesopotamia across, well, Arabia, which is a big desert, it must have taken some sort of time to get there. So I would assume it may have even existed before then, maybe even long before then, who knows. No real good sources on that one, so yeah. And unlike the Epsilon axe, which could be made out of stone, it's possible to make it out of stone, I would argue, the Khopesh really necessitates some form of metalworking, because with a sword, you really just can't do stone. You can try and maybe make it work, but with a sword, you really gotta make it out of some sort of metal, because it's just unwieldy if made out of stone. It just doesn't, it's too brittle, it'll break too easily, so with something like some form of metal that's somewhat malleable, somewhat ductile, has a little bit of spring value to it, then you're gonna probably come out with a much better sword. And thus, the Khopesh, being a sword, means it was probably exclusively made out of metal, which at the time was bronze. As for the composition of the Khopesh, the Epsilon axe, in its metal form, most bronze from the Bronze Age could be put into two general categories, and I say general because there wasn't really any industry standard of the Bronze Age. No, it was all pretty much just, well, let's put metal into this and see what comes out. Well, let's put a bunch of rocks and see what comes out. So most bronze back then was made out of pretty much just copper and tin. Now, there were two sort of distinct categories, one containing about 10% tin, which is what we now refer to as classic bronze, and then one that contains about 6% tin called mild bronze. Now they both had their uses. Mild bronze was generally hammered into sheets and such, used more for armor and stuff like that. Whereas classic bronze was used more for weaponry and stuff like that that would require a little bit more hardness, a little bit more toughness to it. Something to cut into that mild bronze with. I mean, probably not actually, because mild bronze was meant to repel classic bronze, I guess. Of course, this was not the only kind of bronze that was out there. There were other things that were added into other kinds of bronze, and as you get later on into the Bronze Age and even into the Iron Age, when bronze was still being used, you got stuff like lead, arsenic, zinc, gold, and silver, and even antimony added into some of those older forms of bronze, which created a few unique health hazards in some bronze smiths and ancient metallurgists that even back then were generally associated with those that would work with bronze. Specifically arsenic. That one was a particularly bad one. So the Epsilon axe was shaped, well, like the Greek alphabet character, Epsilon. It's kind of this E thing. In fact, it might be on some older keyboards I've noticed. No, it doesn't look like it's on there, but it kind of looks like the symbol for the euro, if you look that up. Pretty much just a semicircle with a couple of stems coming off of it. So that was the general shape of it. Now, there were other forms of it that kind of looked similar. As I said, was no real standardization back then. There was no, this is the Epsilon axe. This is exactly what it needs to look like. So it had a lot of different forms. I do prefer, though, the more semicircle shape rather than the big long one. As for the Khopesh is really weird shaped. When you think of a sword, generally the Khopesh is not the first thing that comes to mind. Generally what comes to mind, for those of us who were brought up in a Western culture, is that nice straight thing with two edges and maybe a fuller down the middle. This was not at all the Khopesh. The Khopesh kind of looked like that for about half of it, and then the rest of it went off like that. A little bit like the Epsilon axe, actually, which is how we kind of came to the conclusion that it was probably derived from it. Blade geometry looked a little bit interesting. There would be ridges in it and weird stuff like that from what I've seen. But again, nothing was really standardized back then, so you just never know what you get. My guess is it probably varied by smith, by region, by pretty much whatever. I mean, there was, again, very little standardization back then. No real industry standard, this is a Khopesh. So, you'll get some with a long stem, you'll get some with a long hook. I've seen an older example of a Khopesh. In my searches, I've seen an older example of one. Dates back to, I don't know, a long time ago, but it's fairly well oxidized, so I'd assume probably a few thousand years maybe, I don't know. But it tends to have a longer stem with a smaller hook at the end. I just kind of like that one better. The hook at the end was used for a variety of purposes: trapping arms, hooking shields, etc. so on. You can just generally sort of imagine what it might have been used for. And of course the stem, sort of an extension of the handle, and also, hey, maybe even as a cutting edge. If I were to recreate these weapons, I would first want to cast these things out of bronze just for authenticity's sake. Both of these weapons really kind of originated in the Bronze Age, at least in the form that I care to deal with. They originated in the Bronze Age, so I would probably want to cast them out of bronze, and really cast and not hammer, just because, well, casting bronze is way better than trying to hammer it out, because then you have to keep annealing it. Might as well just cast it to begin with, and just sort of work hard in it from there. Which, of course, would require some hammering, but not nearly as much as trying to hammer it out from like an ingot or something like that. That would just be a nightmare. And of course, I would want to make the Khopesh with the long stem and the short hook, and the Epsilon axe with the shorter semicircle, just because I feel those are probably a little bit closer to what they may have looked like back in the day. And I would probably also want to make them out of iron at some point, but only later. Because again, they originated in the Bronze Age, and they did translate into the Iron Age later, but not in their most original form. So, well, that's all I've got for you guys today, so thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please do leave a like, subscribe. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please do leave that down in the comments section. All that stuff does help out the algorithm. So, with that, thank you for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.